the floor over to you, and we can get started. So.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks. It's good to see everybody, and look forward to having a good conversation here. We'll run through the project here. I'd like Thad to start off talking a little bit about describing the story and how it kind of worked with the News and Observer. The quick backstory is that this was a project that we started at UNC in an advanced data reporting class. There's a group of students, and Rachel Crumpler, who's here today, was the lead on that, but there were 3 other students that worked on it. And lots of folks and contributors, and many of you that were here helped out and lent a hand to them when they kind of needed a way to go. But what I think we'd like to do today is have Thad talk a little bit about the story and what it was like working with the students, and then have Rachel, really talk about what it was like in the trenches, getting the data and analyzing it and figuring out how to find the story, and then I can talk a little bit about the context that this is happening again, and then we'll leave some time for questions. So if that sounds great, Thad, why don't you start us off? Just tell us about the story and how you were involved with it, and what works for the NNO's audience for a story like this.
Sure. Well, we were very happy to get this story, and I sort of became involved. I think Ryan had reached out to Robin Tomlin, our executive editor, and said that there was a project that you guys were working on and you thought it was really interesting. And it was something that we felt like hadn't really been done, and certainly hadn't been done on this scale before. And so I was sort of the point person from the News and Observer to handle this. And it's a story looking at how the money, both from the state level and from the county health department level, from the local level, had really just been dwindling for many years. And this had caused plenty of problems on its own, but it particularly became a problem once we had a pandemic. So you had sort of these underfunded departments. They were underfunded just with money able to do things, but also with staffing. They had some real staffing issues. And what you guys sort of came to us with was that not only were you presenting this issue and you had a lot of good interviews, but that you had also gathered a lot of the data. And it was interesting to me. I'd never really thought about it, but the state doesn't keep any of this data in one place. So it really was a process of calling all of these individual, some are county health departments, some were multi-county health departments, and putting it in one place. And that was very appealing to us because it was extremely labor intensive, and it hadn't been done really on a statewide level. So we started working with you all. I know Rachel was doing a lot of work. I started communicating with Rachel. I was communicating with Ryan, and it really was a great statewide collaboration. It was a story that was we liked it because of that, because it was telling people really something that they wouldn't know otherwise. It was also a story that our readers could really benefit from. We saw that it got a good response online. Of course, we can measure that. We ran it in print, both in, I can't remember if the Charlotte Observer ran it. I know that the News and Observer and the Herald Sun ran it. And it was a great thing to have. And we were very happy with it. Sort of lessons we learned, and I don't want to say that these were necessarily bad things, but it was sometimes tough moving the data and stuff from the system that you guys had into our system. We had a couple of little glitches in there. The story came in a little long for us. So Rachel remembers me sort of, what if we cut this? And we had a back and forth, but I think it was ultimately a huge success, and we were glad to have it, and we would certainly do it again. Another benefit that I should mention is that we, particularly some of us who know and love the work of the journalism school at UNC, we liked being able to do something and to provide a forum for these students to do that.
Yeah, it's great. I think it's always a challenge when you've got folks, especially students, coming in and bringing a story and knowing, what questions to ask and sort of the editing process. And one of the things that I've just loved about being in North Carolina is it's not just students at our school that are doing this. There's so many, students around the state that are doing really high quality professional journalism, and so many partnerships that were happening. So thanks for that, Thad. And we'll talk more about the kind of the nerdy data stuff. Rachel, tell about from your experience, what do you know now that you wish you had known starting out? What was the process like getting the data? What did you do with it, and how did you find the story?
Yeah, so I would say it was a learning process, definitely for me and the 3 reporters. It was definitely the biggest and most extensive story any of us had been a part of. So from there, we had a lot to learn, but, we first modeled the story after Kaiser Health and News. They did this national story about health departments being underfunded. So that was our inspiration. And that's kind of how we modeled our work. We wanted that data from North Carolina and localize it. So the inspiration started there, but, we originally anticipated that there would be a central database at the state, like Thad mentioned, but it came as quite a shock to me, I think Ryan, just all of us on the project, that the state didn't have that data readily available. So when we first undertook the project, we didn't expect to spend as much time like physically collecting it. We thought a lot of it would be more of just it'd be there and then we'd analyze it and pull data from, but there was quite a bit of time spent sending the emails, requesting the data, following up when we didn't hear responses. So I think that shows. We collected data from over half of the health departments, but there's still health departments we didn't get data from just because we didn't have enough time and resources to continue that. And Ryan will touch on later about expanding that and trying to get the full data from across the state. So yeah, a lot of it just went into collecting the data. At first, we didn't know really where to send the data requests to, but we realized the health director was kind of the best contact, because then they would either get you the data or they'd CC in their finance officer. So that was something we learned kind of through trial and error, that like the health director was a good contact for us. One thing we kind of realized, none of us really had health reporting experience. So kind of getting the knowledge and understanding how much variance there is in North Carolina health departments kind of came as a surprise, rural versus urban, multi-county, single county. All these things kind of factor into what goes into their budget, how they document it. It was just all a lot of different parts. So, in getting the data, what we came to find out was that they would send you data kind of in different forms. We got the same data, but it wasn't, some standard document. They would either send you a spreadsheet that they kept, they would just type the numbers to you, or they would direct you to a budget PDF of the county. So a lot of just different parts that, made it a little more complex, but we worked that out and that was good. I would say another thing that we learned was like public health workers did want their story told too. So like it was kind of hard, initially getting into it, but it was so worthwhile, all this time we spent collecting the data and telling the story, because they were all very pleased to have their story told, because this data wasn't really known by us, by the state, by anybody. So I think that's what made the story, impactful and was, worthwhile to do the legwork of collecting this data and, continuing the legwork in the future of getting the full picture. I'll stop there. I can add more if you have further questions, but.
Well, Rachel, one thing that I think was interesting that might be good to think and talk about was this moment where you've got the data, right? And it's not this linear process. I think a lot of the stories that we work on day to day are very kind of linear stories. They do this, you start here, then you do this next thing, and then the story's done. You had this process of collecting the data, and you definitely had a hypothesis, if I remember right, going into the story. But at some point, you find yourself, if I remember you saying this correctly, kind of like we're awash in data and not sure which end is up. And maybe the story that you thought you had wasn't where the story was going to end up. Can you talk a little bit about how did you pivot? How did you deal with that moment of being overwhelmed and kind of like not knowing where to go with the story?
Yeah, so it was very interesting because, of course, the data came in different, bursts in a way. Like, we didn't all get it at once. It kind of filtered in at its own time. So, we started initial analysis with the number of counties we had, and then we got some more data and then analyzed from there. So the story did evolve based on that, even through conversations. We heard about Jones County potentially being a good maybe source to kind of spotlight in the article, and we're kind of pursuing that lead, but it turned out that we didn't necessarily want to go that way. So definitely one thing we did learn was just be open to the story changing and evolving. In our story, kind of as Thad mentioned, it was very long, and it could have been way longer because there were so many angles that really deserve their own story. So we did have a lot of different pieces of like communicable disease funding was like a section in the article, crisis funding, staffing. So we kind of touched on all these different elements, but they could definitely, be their own story on their own. And that could be something for, reporters to narrow in on. So there was lots of potential within this data to do something else and expand upon things further.
Yeah, I think that that's one of the things that excites me most about where we're going to go with this project, going forward, is that there is such an opportunity for collaboration. And one of the reasons that I've been real interested in data and using, data in journalism is the opportunity to scale, the opportunity for several, news organizations to work together on a project. But also once you get the data, you can, go after it time and time again. And when I think about sort of the economics of these stories, so much of the journalism that we do, you do the story in that it has this very short shelf life, right? It has this expiration date of like tomorrow. And most stories, that we do are, have these very, very high, variable costs. But these data stories are very different because they have a huge fixed cost, right? There's a lot of upfront investment that it takes time to figure out, okay, what are we looking for? What format do we want to store the data in? How do we want to organize this and think about it? But once you've got it and it's all in one place, then you can share it with other people. And that's one of the things that we've done. And I'll share that link here in a second, the data that's available for everybody to use and also contribute to. So, once you've got it built, there's so many bites at the apple. There's so many different ways of looking at this story, but it is, super expensive, right? And takes a lot of time to gather all this data and to organize it and then analyze it. And I think, like Rachel was saying, the challenge is that you have to be willing to say, okay, that path was not the path that we can go down to. And I think the students had this freedom to fumble around a little bit, and explore the question, and which is not something that is easy to do in sort of a daily news environment. So I think that was really, really useful. I also want to say that the students didn't just come up with this on their own, right? That we started with Kaiser Health News, a great story that they did. And I've shared a link in the chat there to the story that they did. But it wasn't just the story that Kaiser Health did. It was the data that Kaiser Health first published. That was national data that they had gathered from a variety of sources. And at the beginning of the semester, one of the things that I was looking to do with my students was to take a look at some stories that had been done by national news organizations that could be localized and that already had a scaffolding of data that the students could build within. So they wouldn't be starting from scratch. Because as young reporters, I think that's one of the biggest challenges, is just looking at that blank sheet of paper and go, of all the questions I could ask in the world, what questions do I want to ask? And so luckily, one of my colleagues at UNC, Kate Shepard, used to work with one of the reporters that was the lead writer on this story. And we got in touch, and I gotta say, the reporters at Kaiser Health News were just so gracious with their time and talking about, what to look out for, and how to think about the story and why they looked at the data in a certain way and not another way. And it was nice because we could take that guidance, and now that the students have collected this data, it can get rolled up into a larger national story, right? So they've got a small piece of it that rolls up into a larger national story. And while the Kaiser Health had data about the employees of the local public health departments in North Carolina was one of those states that was missing. They were missing. They said, "Oh, we couldn't figure it out." And they kept telling us at the beginning, we know that the Department of Health and Human Services must have this all in one place. We just didn't have a chance to get to it. And I think I kept telling Rachel, as we were working on it, like, come on, I know they've got to have it somewhere. They've got to keep this all in one place. And I think what's amazing is that this is a great example of this federalized system of counties, all having their own way of doing things. And we've grappled with the challenge of how do you compare apples to apples and apples to oranges when you're comparing counties and change over time. So Kaiser Health News published their data publicly, which allowed the students to they didn't have to go get all of that. I mean, that saved them an amazing amount of time. And if you put a dollar amount on the number of hours that was saved because Kaiser Health was collaborative and willing to share, I don't know what, but it would be hundreds, if not thousands, I mean, easily thousands of dollars. And then the students, I think, what did you say? You were maybe 10 hours a week on it? So 4 students working 10 hours a week on it or so?
Yeah, I'd say 10, sometimes more, but probably at least 10.
So certainly not, that's not the most efficient use of time, right? Because they're learning, and you want the students to have the freedom to kind of check things out and not have that sort of always deadline pressure. But that's a huge value that the work of these students have provided, and the data that they gathered is now, they've shared it and it's now public, and I'm going to share that with you here in the chat. And so this is the data the students collected from several counties. We looked at only 2010 to 2018, and we looked at just the 46 counties that we had full data for. Correct me if I say any of this, think that's wrong. If I'm misremembering anything, please correct me. But we have data that goes back, I think, as far as 2002 or something like that, and some as recent as 2019, 2020. But there's still, the data that we have, I think, covers 70% of the North Carolina population but there's still a lot of counties that are missing. I think we're missing Durham and Buncombe, and are we missing Forsyth and New Hanover? Some big counties. So there's a real opportunity to work with this data and localize it. The stories the students were able to do, they were able to get to the what, the where and the what and how much, but they didn't have time to dig into the why is this happening, and also what's the human impact in these communities. I think what they found was, and Rachel, maybe you can talk more about this, is that as you talked with local health directors, many of them would say, oh, don't look at expenditures, you need to look at just our communicable disease budget. And there's some reasons that we chose not to do that, but there's more story to be told. And in many of the counties, they would have a decline in public health because part of the department was sold off to a private healthcare company, right? Some of the healthcare, or the dog catcher used to be part of the public health department, and now it wasn't. And even as we were looking at it, I think there was a night where Rachel and I were looking through and like, veterans health, does this belong in, 1 year it's in the public health department in a county, and then it's not in another year. So there's this local context that still needs to be done with this story. There's so much to this story that hasn't been told, and how it affects people in every community around the state. And there's also an opportunity to gather a lot of data. I'm going to share with you a list here of the counties that we were able to get, or the health departments that we were able to get data for. And that's in the chat now. But if your county's not in there, we're still seeking data from that county. And the story I think is solid, but it's not 100% complete. It is still a rough draft of history. There's an opportunity for anybody that wants to get involved with this to fill out information in this Google form that I've also just put in the chat. So if you live or work in one of the counties that we don't have data for, I'd like to encourage you to ask the public health department in your community for their expenditure data for this time period of 2010 to 2018 and share it with reporters around the state through this Google form. Because I think that that's going to be a nice way that we can keep the story alive and really help people understand how their communities are doing compared to other communities, how communities are doing today versus 10 years ago, and where they might go in the future. And then finally, we've got some training coming up as well. And I think that Melanie has already shared a link to the training that we've got coming up through March 15th is the date that we set for that. And that's going to be a workshop where we're going to work with some reporters hands-on about how to analyze this data and how to think about this data, the technical part of it, as well as kind of the critical thinking part of it, how we interview data and how data might lie to us. And then finally, of course, the important part is how to tell a story with it, because data without a story is just sort of, bland and it doesn't connect with people. So there's a lot of opportunities, I think, here for ongoing collaboration and storytelling. And I just want to say that this couldn't have happened without the collaboration of Kaiser Health News, and it couldn't have happened without Rose Hoban very kindly sharing contacts and ideas of sources with the students through a conversation that she and I had. So this kind of collaboration that we're seeing in North Carolina, as well as the technical skills of data, it's fun to see, the computers are doing what the computers are good at, and humans are doing what humans are good at, and it's starting to have a lot of impact. So I think this is, there's a lot of other examples that we could look at. In fact, there's a story that ran in Carolina Public Press yesterday about houses with insufficient plumbing that another group of students did from that class, and another student did some really cool work about flood insurance, and all of this data that the students have done, they've learned how to make it public. And so we're learning, not just how to do the technical side, but how to collaborate as well. I know I want to leave some time for questions here. Thad, is there any, going through that stuff, was there anything that caught your eye about ideas for working with data or nerdy professors and students?
Well, I think there's so much there. I mean, we talked, I joked about it was a little long, but everything we cut could have been almost its own story. And one of the things that you kind of touched on there, but I would really give a lot of credit to, is the humans, the people side of this that you guys did. It wasn't just, it was a lot of data, but there was some really interesting stuff. As I was editing it and I was going through it, there would be these staggering figures and other things, but also just some of this stuff. And I can't remember, I think it was Gibby Harris out of Mecklenburg County that said, just imagine this idea, because everybody was like, oh, well, they're getting all this money because of coronavirus. And she said, imagine you get $300,000, but you have to spend it in 3 months and you have to do all this paperwork. And there were counties that were assigning people from the department who had really nothing to do with the paperwork, who were doing all that. And so I think that in addition to all of the data, which there was so much, but there was some really good reporting and interviews in there too, which really, really made the whole thing pop.
Rachel, what else did you, as you were thinking about the story, what else, like if you had unlimited time and resources and didn't have professors breathing down your neck to hand in assignments, what other stories would you want to work on? What else is out there for the rest of the journalists in North Carolina to work on? Why does it matter?
A lot. This story really did teach me a lot about public health, and there's so much there, but crisis funding was something that really interested me, and we talk about that in the story, but it kind of, I was even talking to a legislator in an interview, and I'm like, well, crisis funding keeps happening, like it's a cycle, but like, why don't we break the cycle? And that just dynamic really interests me overall. And like, Thad was saying, like sources that are quoted in the story, tell us why crisis funding isn't good, but yet it still happens. So I think that crisis funding dynamic's interesting. The difference funding, for multi-county health departments versus single county. From interviews, there seems to be, some different makeups there. Some rely more on grant funding, some, don't. So that dynamic's interesting, especially as you see multi-county health departments, coming up a little bit more forming. And just, as I was saying, just the individual health departments, as a whole, a lot could be said within just one health department, and telling that story of like, what's it like on the ground? What's its past? What's its future? So just even singling in on one health department would be interesting. Since we covered so many, there are a lot of details that I had to leave out about, just one that really could be spotlighted.
That's great. Well, I want to go ahead and open the floor up for some questions. And before I do that, just a reminder to go back and that link that Melanie shared in the chat, and I'm sure we'll be sending this around, to sign up if you're interested in working on this story and learning some data skills and learning some data skills with some real world data that we've been working with these expenditures and seeing how they might work with your county. Again, we've got that application open for 5. We're going to select 5 reporters, and we're going to keep it small so we can really make sure that we can do this hands-on. But we're looking for 5 reporters to work on this data with us. That application that's at the link that we've got in the chat there, that application closes March 5th. So that's next Friday. And we'll be notifying the 5 reporters that have been selected for that program on March 8th. And then the program will be held March 15th. It'll be virtual from 3 to 5 p.m. And so we'll be working on with this data hands-on. I'm learning some real basic data skills, but basic skills, but that can have real quick impact. That's what we're going for, quick impact for the stories in your community. So I hope we see lots of interest in that and folks signing up. And I'm sure that Rachel's got a lot of insights at that as well. Let's open that up to questions from the floor. And I don't know what the best way to do that is here, but I see we've got a question from Ken, and I don't know if Phil or Kate, if you want to be the MCs here, but.
Yeah, I can read through that one. And again, if anybody has questions, drop them in the chat. If you can talk faster than you can type, just throw your name in there. I'll come back and unmute you. But Ken had a question here of, did you see any difference between counties that had standalone health departments and those where the health department and social services department were under one roof?
Yeah, so I think the only one, if I recall, that we worked with that was consolidated was Wake. And what they told me to do was to so we weren't capturing too much. We were just capturing public health. They told me what categories to add. So that's what's reflected in our data. We didn't capture the consolidated part. We just captured public health. So that is an important point that you bring up. With all the differences between the health departments, make sure the categories are kind of being the same and lining up, because if we had captured everything, that would have thrown off our analysis a bit.
I'll say that one thing that we did my hypothesis going into this is that we were going to see counties with small populations have really high per capita expenses because there's some fixed cost with delivering services that if you don't have a lot of folks to spread out across, they're just going to be very high per capita. And boy, we looked at that kind of every other way, and that just did not turn out. That turned out to be not an accurate hypothesis. Now, and I don't imagine that'll change a lot as we get other counties. But that's one thing we looked at. We sort of said, well, let's control for changes in population. And so we did that. So every year you'll see, as certain counties gain population and certain counties lose population. Every year it's, expenses per capita. And the other thing that we controlled for was inflation, but that's a good question, Ken.
And Ryan, you just started to get into it a little bit there on the population changes, but another question just popped up there about population changes in the counties or the region, and seeing any difference in funding based off of other changes over the past 10 years, like race and ethnicity.
We didn't
age.
look at, yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we didn't look at the demographics of the county I don't think we did, except in cursory. We didn't look at race. We didn't look at age at any point. We didn't look at ethnicity. At one point, I remember we had some questions, and I think we kind of anecdotally looked at per capita income as kind of a measurement to see if there was any relationship there. And I think it was Davidson County that was really interesting, that as the county as their income went up, their spending on public health went down. And that's a great example of, we know that happened, but we don't know why, and we don't know so what. We don't know if that's good or that's bad. And I really think that one of the things that students I talked about a lot was that this is a neutral story. It's not. There are some folks that will look at this and say this is a story about government efficiency and delivering government services more efficiently. There will some that will look at it and will say it's a dereliction of duty and a lack of investment in something that bit us when the pandemic came around. That's, we don't have that why and that so what. And there's a great local story in every county about that. And Thad and Rachel, jump in here on any of this stuff if there's something I'm forgetting you want to add in there. I'm going to share a little bit of a more robust data set that we've also collected. It's organized slightly differently, but this includes the population for each county and for each year. So in addition to the expenditures for each year, it has the population, and it has the expenditures, when adjusted for inflation. I'll actually send that to everyone here. Okay. Other questions or thoughts? What can we do if we did a project like this to make it more useful in the future? Are there opportunities here that we're just adjacent to, that if we tweaked something would be more effective? And by the way, I've been teaching on Zoom for like 18 months. I'm really good at silence, so no rush.
If we were all in person like we were a year ago, we'd have this session and just holding us off from going to the bar, but no excuse right now. So.
And frankly, we don't know if everyone's at the bar right now anyway.
That's
so maybe
right.
They're already.
It could be the case.
Go ahead, Phil.
Well, I was just going to see if there's any last questions. Give a last call for comments from the panel here. Well, Rachel, I mean, outstanding work. I read through this just in getting ready for this session and was pretty impressed. But just to hear you walk through this and the work that you all did, just outstanding work. Great job. And Ryan and Thad and Melanie, thank you for pulling this together. I think it's really helpful. It was a year ago almost to the day that we met, and in that time, Ryan threw it out a couple of times, the collaboration of all of our organizations and people like Rose. I see you there, Rose. Hello. That is doing this great work and also sharing it has been just great to see. So I encourage everybody, go through these links, these docs, apply for these programs. I hope you all take advantage of that. I know this was just the tip of the iceberg of what was possible in the short time that we had. But we'll save all this and we'll have links that are ready to go, and we'll save the chat so you can see all these docs as well if you need it. But
And I just want to say one last thanks. Thanks to Melanie for helping us organize this. Thanks to the folks at my school that give me the freedom to teach a class like this that is sort of experimental and everybody kind of looks at. I really couldn't have done it without their support. And thanks to Thad and Robin at the Interno for working with us, and Rose for giving those early good suggestions, and for the folks at Kaiser Health. Really all of you just couldn't do it without everybody.
And I would just chime in. Thank you for offering it to us. It was a huge benefit for us, and we really appreciated it.
And thanks to all the young people that are still interested in doing journalism and going and doing all this incredibly hard work. And I think maybe I didn't scare anybody away from journalism, so that's always good.
Good job.
Well, good. Well, thank you again to panel, everybody here for joining us. I'm guessing that the majority of this crowd may not join me in the next session on digital advertising, but you're more than welcome to do that. And we've got a general business meeting later today at 4 o'clock. And then don't forget, head over to the Press Association website. We've got links there for the awards presentation. PBSNC did a great job for us, recording, editing, producing an award show. And so you can view that and then see all the awards publications by publication, by division, by awards. So you'll be able to post all those in your papers after 4:30 today. So thank you again. We look forward to seeing you all soon, and let us know if we can do anything to help. So thank you all.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you.
Thank you.